Hello, all. Ready for tech that reflects the global world? Welcome to our podcast, The Global Code. We go beyond the buzzwords to explore real world tech solutions for and with everybody, everywhere in the age of AI. I'm your co host, Dr. Salima Bhimani, Maven of Moonshots, and I'm going to welcome my two co hosts, Shadan Deleveaux, G-Force of Talent, and Ashish Pujari, the Master of Engineers. We were super excited about having Lavina Ramkissoon. Did I say your last name correctly? Tell me if I didn't.
Very
I
much
did.
so.
Okay, perfect. Okay. And so we're super excited about having her because she's a dedicated visionary, a pioneer in AI advancement, influential figure, and a full stack human. And I want to know what that means exactly. And she's also a mom of twins, and she's trying to create a more intelligent tomorrow. Recognized as a top ranking leader in the realm of AI advancement globally. So we're super, 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 super excited to have you here today, and to get the conversation kicked off. Now, where we wanted to really start with you is to understand your what is happening in the African continent when it comes to technology and AI, and what's brought you to this path of being this influential voice.
Wow. So a lot happening all at the same time. I wish we had like a whole day in terms of unpacking all of this. But in a nutshell, I think we're very much looking at policies and strategies around, emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and blockchain and quantum computing, kind of really taking to the forefront of that. In terms of innovation, we're starting to see quite a lot of, new sort of ideas fermenting on ground. We're also seeing investments really starting to come through. And I think the cornerstone of all of this is research. We're starting to see a lot more being pushed towards that particular sort of space to better understand it. So Africa as a whole has probably had the chance of playing around with the tech for a long time before it actually decided where it wanted to go with it. And I think we're at that intersection point right now of being very deliberate about where we're headed. And I think, to answer the second part of your question, in terms of what brought me to it, I think I just have a love for technology and I have a love for humanity. And I found myself in the intersection of both. And I thought, why not?
So super interesting. One of the things I appreciate about your background is I feel that it's giving you a bunch of different lenses, right? So, computer scientist, advisor, investor, judge, data expert. You have all of these experiences and all of these things. And so I'm wondering how those lenses are shaping your approach as you engage from the policy aspect and the research and the development aspect of the technology, particularly on the continent.
I think it actually gives me quite a very unique perspective that I bring to the forefront. So there's generally three areas that I kind of really play around with, which is technology, psychology, and economics. And I kind of use all of my experiences or past experiences to kind of fall within the one of those three different areas, right? And with that, it allows me to kind of see a bigger picture that is not very one directional, right? So to give you an example, if I sit as a technologist, the chances of me ever getting involved in policy is 0 to none, but yet I am, right? And that's purely now allowing me to have access to understanding how does the country function? How does the continent function? What is required from an economic level, from a political level, from a social level, from a technological point of view. So it actually allows me to push myself to understand things along the chain a lot better. And by understanding that, I think you can really start to understand what are the gaps that's required to be filled. But not only that, you also get to understand what is that localization aspect. So what are those types of solutions that would actually work in the context of Africa or in the context of the US or in the context of Europe, And I think those are the kind of important bits because everyone screams and shouts about having to know exactly, or understand where technology is driving us towards. But at the end of the day, it is very much what's the practical steps? What is the number one, two, three, four kind of things that's required to take us? And that very few people actually understand.
So, Lavina, can you take us back a little bit just to set some context? 'Cause I imagine a lot of our listeners don't know about what's happening in the continent, what has happened in terms of technology. What the evolution has been like in terms of advancing, um, so the field of technology in the continent. So, could you give us a little bit of historical background on like where were we, where have we come to, and where are we going?
I love this question. So let's delve into the aspect of artificial intelligence in particular as APs, right? So with regards to that, we've kind of seen in the early stages of 2018, the African Union pretty much put out a continental strategy in terms of, what should we be doing in terms of artificial intelligence? And that was there for the 54, 56 different countries to kind of give them some guidance on it. And as a result, we get pulled into country levels to help to build out those different areas and aspects. To date, just from a regulatory perspective, as an example, pre-COVID, we had only 6 countries that had some form of a data privacy policy. Post-COVID, that's 3 years later, we have 32 countries across the continent that actually has a form of data privacy policy. Now, that's huge for a continent like Africa. And that also shows the adoption rate and the acceleration of the want to actually implement. So I think governments are actually very keen on that front. And having that is actually quite a good advantage, right? Same with the artificial intelligence. We have, had 8 countries to date that has some form of an AI strategy. We have 1 country that has a policy. The way that it normally works is that you have a strategy, then a policy, and then an act. And so we're kind of on the way to that. Out of that spectrum, we probably have about 15 countries that are absolutely working on putting an AI strategy or policy together for their country. So quite active ecosystem. If we had to talk about the investment front, I think we've seen quite a lot of investment starting to come in. But also I think it's very cautious investment, right? So to date, we've seen obviously big tech was being quite a large supporter in terms of, the continent. We've had, the likes of Google wanting to uplift, I think it was 1 million software engineers within a 10-year period. We've had, some of the other guys, putting in like $1 billion. We've also seen some funds coming about that's dedicated to emerging tech. We also are starting to see private and public partnerships play quite a large role. So I think the ecosystem is slowly kind of maturing and evolving into that space. But one thing that has been really exciting for me is the research. So, especially on artificial intelligence, we've seen the likes of Ghana and Tanzania come about where they have gone ahead and, put down base roots in terms of putting up an AI lab or an AI observatory. And, including that, we've seen their university sort of take the knock-on effect and start offering a lot more courses that are dedicated to artificial intelligence, as an example. So as a result, I think in this short space of time, we've kind of seen the ecosystem kind of not sleeping, if I could say, or utilize it in that manner. Yeah, so from a startup perspective, we've also seen some interesting sort of innovations coming about on that front. Yeah, and we'll probably get into some of those details a little bit later. So where we're at today is we're still in a, of the starting block. So nowhere near a mature state at all. But I think we're at the point where, it's literally going to uptake. And that uptake is going to be tenfold if it's done in the right way.
It sounds like there's a lot of things happening. Just to dive a little bit deeper into what's happening. Um, you know, First of all, let's baseline the conversation a little bit, right? So when we say AI and when we say, responsible AI or ethical AI, what does that mean, for you or for the African Union? Because what we have heard is like people say, hey, AI is all about prediction. Maybe it's about generating something or taking data and making more content, right? Um, and just you know an additional question or maybe a sub question would be, um, what is the difference, if you have seen any, between how, like, let's say the African Union views AI versus how like a North American or European based company views AI?
Yeah, super, super, super interesting questions. And this is the fun part for me. So in terms of, ethical stance or responsible AI, as such, I think it hits the continent on so many different levels, right? We talk about cultural inclusivity, we talk about digital divide, we talk about tech socialism, we talk about, tech colonization, all of these different aspects that kind of hit us on all different fronts, right? So we sit with about 2,600 odd different languages. That's quite huge and very unique to the continent at large. With that, you can't afford to leave any single person out. So that in itself is, how do we then look at incentivizing the likes of, be it big tech or the telcos or anyone else, to make sure that their last mile to that end person is actually included, right? So it's great when we talk about the digital divide, but we also have to then talk about the flip side of it, which is the positive side. So how do we actually then solve for that? And those are things like digital equality, digital access, digital inclusiveness, digital accountability, digital fairness. Those things become quite key. So, for example, how do we ensure that an elderly gogo, as they're fondly known, a grandmom in the African sort of context, how do we ensure that she's actually catered, utilizing, whether it's e-government services or whether it's utilizing her mobile phone and just paying, whether it is her within the context of healthcare, that becomes really important. Equally so, how do we ensure that, a billionaire that's flying through the skies is also equally catered? How do we also ensure, a youth is then being part of that conversation and is being catered for? Given the fact that we're largely a youth-driven continent. I think the average age is about 19 now, which is really, really young, right? And with that, it's we've seen things like social media play such a large role in terms of, changing our attitudes, changing our beliefs, changing our morals, right? And that knock-on effect it has had on our youth, where we don't have enough in place to protect them. And that's like one aspect. So there's like so many different areas when we have to talk about, this particular aspect, of ethics. And, I guess for us, it also boils down to base, right? Those basics really include things like infrastructure, electricity, water, making sure that those basic things are in place, together with connectivity. Most places have a 2G or a 3G network that they work off, or if they're lucky, right, to have it. Some don't yet. So, there's like so many multiple layers. So there's the foundational, core infrastructure that's required. And then there's all the applications over and above that. But I think it is on the top of all our minds, right? Because the continent is at that position where, whether you're in, the likes of government sector, or whether you're in the likes of private sector, or even in civil society, you're kind of really starting to take a stance that you can't afford to look the other way, because no one's giving you a choice.
Incredibly interesting. I think you've touched on so many things. And, one of the things that stands out is just the variety of languages, like the richness of languages. And so when you think about large language models and then the need for inclusivity and things like that, like just that base level of ensuring that there's representation across the breadth of that diversity, I think is incredibly important. And so thinking about things like that, what do you see as being the biggest opportunity for technology on the continent in terms of application? And then what do you see as being the biggest challenge in terms of application as well?
Ooh, okay, so let's maybe start with the challenges. So challenges are definitely infrastructure, attracting the right kind of investments to complete those infrastructure basics that's required. Sometimes it's not always about revenue, and that's kind of what we are seeing at this point to get to the last mile person. Um, some of the other challenges are we're probably not, allowing for adoption of the technology quick enough. So what do we mean by that? From an academic perspective, we're probably not, allowing ourselves to be multidisciplinary or even offer those multidisciplinary degrees already, right? Although the rest of the world is probably doing that. We're not looking at, the short-term courses to kind of bridge that gap in terms of skills at the moment. We know that there's a brain drainage, but then we kind of like, okay, what are we doing? So there's a couple of challenges, right, that sit with us. But I think the opportunity are probably tenfold. We know, as an example, in healthcare, we only have 2% of the healthcare data captured in Africa. That is tenfold waiting there, right? In terms of understanding who we are, right? So that we can actually get better diagnosed or that we can better understand ourselves as beings. So that in itself for me is quite large. So the whole data portion, and allowing for that, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in telco, financial, whether it's in whichever sector, is kind of irrelevant. But having a good base of data, that is well structured, that is well defined, that is possibly an open data ecosystem, will probably spur a lot more to actually happen on the continent. That's one aspect in terms of opportunity. The other opportunity is definitely around, structuring something on a sort of, continental view. So the continent in itself doesn't quite function as much as the likes of an EU, right? So what do we mean by that? We don't have the African Union as the driving body that governs and, drives policies and holds everyone accountable. What it does do is it does allow us to mandate from a point of view of guidance and from a point of view of advisory, right? So we would go into governments and we would go. So hence from that perspective, I think technology can be the thing that allows us to circumvent that lack from our mandate at this point in time. What do we mean by that? Imagine if we had, as an example, an ethical board for Africa, right? That ethical board would tackle a number of things, right? It would have an oversight in terms of one of the different types of application. It would allow, the normal citizen to be able to, have their voices heard, have their cases understood, and see if there's something that drastically needs to be done to be shifted, right? That could be from a policy perspective, from an investment perspective. It could even be from, actual solutions or things on ground. So I think, from a data perspective, there's something. From an ethical perspective, there's different areas. Another area in terms of ethics, I think, is a framework. We don't have somewhat of a framework at the moment in terms of that. And then I guess also in terms of creating more of a mature sort of ecosystem. That's something that is most welcomed at this point in time. Because as much as there are some stuff that is happening on ground, there are some startups that are at a little bit more mature state that kind of require different things. But there's probably about 80% that's, fitting the category of still being very early pre-seed, seed stage. So I think, helping to develop a better ecosystem or a more supportive ecosystem. And that could literally mean, anybody and everybody within that sort of frame is definitely areas. And research. I don't think I can stress that enough. I think we have research opportunities that are quite large, as you mentioned, probably in languages. That could be a first sort of stance. But equally so, we like, for example, we've seen a lot of investments already come into the continent. We've seen, all of this, but what is the net effect of all of this? What has it, accounted to at the end of the day? How has it tangibly affected me as Lavina, as a digital citizen? I've got to better understand that sort of component. So, it's, I don't know, I guess understanding whether a startup or a big tech or even government has done something, and we kind of then measure that, right? And what does that measurement actually look like? Are we talking about jobs created? Are we talking about knock-on effect to GDP? Are we talking about, carbon emissions saved? Are we talking about, the list can go on. But like, in that itself, I think there's a lot. And I think the whole inclusivity, obviously, of women and having that as a larger portion and as a larger voice is absolutely required. And those are like, as much as they are all sort of, challenges, but I think at the same time, they also are large opportunities equally so. So yeah, I hope that kind of gives you a bit of a nutshell,
For sure.
in terms of where we're headed to.
Yeah, no, it does. You gave us a lot of context there, so thank you so much for that. You got me really curious because one thing that I've been thinking about and talking about has been really around like how AI is potentially opening up the door for us to address inequities, maybe in a way that we wouldn't have in the past, right? Because it's making possible things that weren't possible before. And as part of that, what we are seeing is that there are more startups that are emerging from the global south, from sort of non North American, European contexts, and that potentially are also addressing more local challenges. And that's something that I think, in general, big tech has struggled with to really understand local contexts that are outside of North America or Europe and really design and define for those contexts. But when you have people that are producing out of those contexts who come from them, I think possibly the technology is different. I'm just curious about your point of view on that.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I think being on ground and kind of interacting with a few of them, and I'll probably give a few examples if that's okay.
That would be great. Yeah.
Obviously anonymously, but
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, we kind of did a sort of study a while ago. It was with refugees and homeless people across the continent, and understanding what they kind of needed. At the end of the day, it really came about in terms of if they had access to a device, a mobile device, right? What net effect would that have to them? And we kind of found that at the end of it, it was being included in society. How does that translate? You probably ask. And it was, whether it was using a USSD code or whether it was using a mobile app, right? They could then walk into a restaurant already knowing that they have food that was left over. They could walk in and pick it up, right? I mean, that in itself is them being included in society. It's a very small sort of step, but again, it's a step towards, that bigger picture or those softer things that we kind of talk about. Another area that we looked at was, so generally within the continent, we have probably 1 to about 250,000. So one nurse to probably about 250,000 people in a community, right? Which is quite a large sort of burden, as you would imagine, on the nurse herself. So we did one where we allowed for prenatal moms. It was called the Mom Care Project, and literally allowed for monitoring using AI and blockchain. Before from the time she fell pregnant all the way to I think 6 months post pregnancy, in terms of just being able to give updates, blood pressure, the usual kind of stats that one would require in terms of just feeding that information through. And so it lessened the sort of visits and it lessened the cost to actually get to a healthcare physician, that was required. And that in itself helped to, change the way that people operated or how they function, right? I guess another area for us was there was a 16-year-old who kind of became orphaned quite suddenly, lost both his parents. And he was, living with his grandmom at the farm. And, he then created an AI for leaf prediction and, crop yielding and optimization for her. And it worked and it helped her to lessen her load, right? But then he also then started supplying it to the neighboring farmers. And, that in itself at the age of 16 is like a wow, right? He didn't need anybody, didn't need a business plan, didn't need anything. It was just out of a sheer need. And then he even took it further. He went to the telcos and negotiated with the telcos that the farmers will not pay for it. And they granted him that. Like, wow, at 16, right? So, another interesting one that just came about recently, probably at the beginning of this year, is around flooding and, disaster relief. So, we created an AI a voice application where people would just send in voice notes in their local languages. And we would, this was for flooding that occurred. And we would then dispatch the necessary sort of requirements to them or necessary aid, to their actual locations that they would then send to us. So I think, there's so many different varied sort of directions in which AI is being utilized, locally that I think, it's not necessarily like a big aha moment for, the likes of the North. But it is something that is super relevant and super needed, from a local aspect. And I think, the next step that we're going to probably see is, the connecting of all of these different systems together to create a better ecosystem, and probably something that's more flourishing.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? You mentioned sort of the gender piece, and I just want to kind of take that up a little bit, and really talk about, what is happening for women when it comes to these sort of technological evolutions, like how are we dealing with access? I was just reading some stats recently where they were saying, and, sort of in the global South, one thing we know is that cell phone use is like really high, but how women use cell phones is very different than how men use cell phones, as an example. Right. And the data that we're capturing is very different, is very gendered as well. As a result of that, data that's being used to build these technologies, if you're using cell phone data, is very different. So I'm just curious, like, what is happening in terms of women's access, not only to the use of technology, but also their involvement in the development of AI and so these localized solutions that you're talking about.
So I've got to say that African women have definitely stepped up in terms of being present, and sort of contributing to that bigger picture. So traditionally speaking, on the continent, we know that women are the sort of core in terms of families, right? So they're the ones that are generally out there working. They're the ones that keep the families together. They kind of, are sitting either in the farms or at the stalls and, kind of just making ends meet, right? That's the general stance. And to that point, I think we've started seeing a lot more women enter that space. From a need of, yes, okay, I need to digitize. Okay, great. How can I? What's the different areas? What's the different angle? Whether it's just, creating, whether it's a, something that's works for them, that allows for them to function very differently, it's there. But, in the grand scheme of things, I think we're still far off from changing that narrative, in all honesty. Yeah, I mean, we've all come here, and we all kind of have our predispositions in terms of our past experiences, and how they actually shape us in terms of what we currently do, right? And I think, African women have traditionally worked very hard. They are generally very loud or very bold, and they kind of just drive. They drive community. They drive, families, and they're taking that a lot more seriously when it comes to the tech side. Um, yeah, I mean, if we have to talk on, like leadership role, we probably only see about 20 to 24% of women actually that sit on board level, across the continent. And that in itself is large enough for us to like stand up and say, that needs to change, and it needs to change relatively quickly. One great thing on the ground though that's happening is there's a large focus for youth, female, students to kind of get into STEM, to get into different initiatives on ground. So a lot of that has kind of kicked off and kind of spurred, the next generation to be well supported. But I think in terms of the current generation, there's probably some stuff that we still need.
Right. Just to expand on that topic a little bit, but take it from more of like a data lens. For AI, you need data, right, to train the AI so that you get usable output, right? So when it comes to, like you mentioned, that data collection is an issue in some cases, that you just don't have enough of it, right? But on the flip side, maybe you can have a lot of it, but it's just for like a specific group of people. Like how do you foresee African Union addressing that challenge where there is no data bias which like unknowingly creeps into training of AI?
Yeah, interesting question. I don't know if anyone here has the answer, but I think with that we have to look at data in terms of the data source, in terms of the data collection, in terms of the data usage, as well as in terms of the infrastructure that's required, right? And those are the different areas from an AU perspective that we have. We have a lot in terms of driving different initiatives. We have EPAT, which is like an AI sort of expert group that's been put together that kind of looks at, different subsections, and data infrastructure or data is one of those sub areas, right? So within that, what are we looking at? We have to be able to get to a point where we can have some form of a source of truth of data, right? And that I use very loosely because there's many multiple versions of a truth of data, right? But we'll put that aside for now. And with that, if we can get the value chain right in terms of how data flows across the continent, I think that is going to be probably the biggest win from an AU perspective, or even just a continental level. Yeah.
So we've covered so many things. As you think about just continued development, investment, adoption around technology, and as you project and look forward 5-10 years, what scenario has you happy and smiling, right? Like what has the future you happy and smiling, saying, you know what, yeah, this is awesome.
I think there's many things. One, I think, is just the sheer tenacity. When you kind of on ground and kind of really, go to visit people that's innovating, I think you're just in awe and inspired every single time. Like I have never been uninspired, like by a story that has emerged from the continent. So one is that natural hunger and natural want to actually just, I guess, innovate or kind of transfer. I think that spirit is just definitely there. I think on another front, kind of seeing the right sort of mixture coming together from a governmental ministerial level, right? We're starting to see a lot of younger ministers coming on board, which is kind of pushing the narrative in a very different direction. And that in itself excites me a lot because it's almost giving room and space for, the youth to kind of have their drive, right? Also, I guess in terms of the innovation that's happening on ground, you've kind of heard some of the stories, but I mean, I could probably, delve into a lot more that would just, kind of give you an idea of where we're headed towards. So if I had to paint a picture of what my future looks like in Africa, it would be one where, there's someone that's sitting in a rural area or with very little to zero, sort of infrastructure around them, but still being able to be participating in the digital world to some degree, right? For me, that is probably what makes me happy. And the fact that it makes me happy is because it is actually achievable, and it's achievable because of tech, right? If I had to give you an example, imagine we had created an African chatbot that would do anything in any language. That chatbot now, I have access to it sitting out in a rural area. But what can I do with it? I can use my camera and do skin diagnosis as an example, get it, verified through a telehealth doctor, and get that script automatically sent to me via drone as an example, right? Now, all of those things are there, but then we can push it further, right? We can then take the drugs that's being utilized, understand it better in terms of its effect on me as an individual. So I'd go through different, capture that from a trial perspective, and then understand what is working and what isn't working and why. And that would be on a cellular level. So then we're getting into personalized medicine as an example, right? I mean, that in itself is just like you're solving an entire ecosystem problem with very little effort, right? You just need a want on all sides to actually make this possible. And I think we're close. So yeah.
That I love hearing you talk because I feel like there's so much potential and possibility, but it's not even in the future, it's now, it's happening now. People are on the ground, um, using tech to solve real everyday problems. I read this, data point recently that, the most prominent large language models are still like 60% of them are still coming out of the US actually specifically. Um and so my question for you really is like, what does North America and Europe, where, oftentimes a lot of these technological advancements are happening on this side of the world, what should we be learning from the continent? Like I want to flip the script a little bit here where it's not sort of the flow of information, knowledge, advancement is not coming from one side to the other, but we're seeing a different kind of relationship building. And do you see that? Where are we at with that? And yeah, what do we need to learn from the African continent about technology and where it needs to go?
That's a beautiful question. So I would say, we're at the point of understanding ourselves better as human beings. And that kind of takes everyone into account, right? So I guess Africa has a voice when it comes to tech, and it needs to be heard. It, I think the learnings for us is probably on a few fronts. One is innovate out of a need. Don't innovate just because you can. So, like for us, that is probably number one and really key. I think the second bit is the cost of intelligence. So for us is, we always tend to pay a price when it comes to our intellectual property. Whether that be from, IP laws or whether that be from, the larger counterparts across the globe. Somehow or the other, I think Africa is always just, we accept whatever and we just kind of move on. And I think that narrative needs to be supported slightly differently. I think also the cost of data. So, yes, we have a large portion of uncaptured data, but what can we do collectively to ensure that Africa can benefit first prior to anyone else, right? So like there's those sort of things that, are the learnings. I'd probably add another one, which is there are lots of skills on ground that could actually add tremendous value to the North. And that's probably untouched. So I would encourage you guys to, probably look at that as well. And I think, to probably end is, we have an opportunity between the North and the South, right? And that opportunity is, let's create a bridge. That bridge can be a few things, right? Whether it be exchanges of knowledge, whether that be lessons learned, whether that be, investments, whether that be, swapping of, innovations or utilization of innovation, whatever the case may be. But I think there's room for us to build a bridge and a bridge that actually can work, for the bigger sort of good.
I love that. I mean, look, I feel so filled right now. Like it was a beautiful question, Salima, and even more beautiful answer, because I think it just shows the hope, the potential of opportunity for the rest of the world to continue to just learn from the continent and share in the growth, and not necessarily have an extractive approach, but more so mutually beneficial growth and understanding. So thank you for that.
So, Lavina, before we close out, is there any other words of wisdom that you have for us folks sitting in the other part of the world
So
that we can
first and
chew on?
foremost, first and foremost, like apologies for like trying to give you context and just because we're such a large continent, it like over
Yeah,
inundation of information. So,
not at all.
like I'm glad you guys bared with me through that. But I think, for me, parting words is, raising teenagers in today's day and age is quite something. So, I kind of came up with a piece of advice for my twin girl, which I think is also relevant to every single one of us here. And that is really every nanosecond of every day we have a choice. And for me, it's as simple as that. We're going to make mistakes as humanity. We're going to, do great things as humanity. But let's remember that every second, every nanosecond, we have a choice to rewrite something that's gone wrong, or we have an opportunity to kind of really accelerate something that has gone right. And I think, at the inflection point of artificial intelligence and humanity, and for us to try and create that balance and that net effect, for us, we've just got to be super deliberate, super careful, and I think that we'll get there.
Talking to you has been an absolute inspiration. I think I can agree. I can see the smiles on all of our faces. I think we're all lit up now. And we're looking forward to staying connected with you and seeing all your incredible work and the work of all the people who are in the African continent, are trying to push forward, new ways of being and living that open up possibility for everybody. And so we're really, really, really excited about what comes.
Appreciation to all of you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey, all. We're entering our jam session, but we're clearly not doing it right after our podcast episode with a guest today. We are doing it post for different reasons, but so that's why you're going to see us with different haircuts and different colors and all of that. But we're excited actually to do this jam session because we spoke with Lavina Ramkissoon a few weeks ago, and she works out of the African continent, and she had some incredible, incredible things to share with us about what is happening in the continent in terms of application of AI level policy, sort of ground level issues when it comes to, emerging technologies. And so we're going to do our jam session now post, but it's going to still be interesting and exciting because she gave us so much to think about. Is that not right?
She absolutely did. I think for me, just beyond her impressive background, she just really stoked so many ideas around the challenges and the opportunity around technology and AI in particular. And so super excited to do this jam session.
All right, so let's get started. So, Ashish, thoughts on big kind of takeaways that you had from the session with her?
Uh, so for me, like, uh, first of all, like the amount of diversity there is in Africa is kind of like mind-boggling. Um, Fact that she brought up that there are over 3,000 languages. I'm thinking like, model training, how's that gonna work? Um, Internet is mainly in English, so do we even have enough data to train the models? And if you also think about translation, maybe, okay, you can get away with training, and maybe you just think, okay, I'll pick something up in one language and translate it over to something else. I don't even know how that would work. Just for an example, I don't know if y'all have seen, like on TikTok, there is this song going around about, you know, like a girl saying, I want a man in finance and should be 6'5" and she should have blue eyes. But I'm thinking, okay, that song, okay, might work in the US, but if you just translate it like word by word, it doesn't
Right.
really translate over to something in Africa, right? So I'm thinking, yeah, like all these challenges on top of the emphasis that Lavina had on, like, just ground level realities where not everybody has the same amount of access. Like, I'm just like uh, thinking like how easy or difficult it might be for AI to uh, to have you know like accessibility in general for AI among the masses. I don't know how that's gonna look like. It's definitely like here we don't give it another thought, right? It's like, oh, everybody can
Mm,
use it, but over there it sounds like there
right,
are
right.
many challenges just from the fact that it is Africa. But I'm glad that they are thinking about it. We are still early in the game. They have published like multiple papers on it. Uh, so yeah, definitely keep my eyes to see where it's gonna take
Mhm.
root and grow in Africa.
Yeah, to your point, you have a continent with 50 plus countries, a billion, almost a billion and a half people, thousands of languages. How do you make sure that everyone is included? All of these perspectives, all of these views, all of these thoughts, and for me, it really brings in the that basic concept of inclusion, right? Like as we think about what inclusion looks like globally, how do you really take that into account, factor that in with respect to training models and things like that? And so, despite all of the challenges, it's great to see that there are already local applications and real world solutions that are happening on the ground. And I think for me, that was one of the most encouraging aspects of everything that she talked about. Salima, I
Yeah.
don't know. What do you think?
No, I agree with you, all the points that both of you are making. I mean, I think that that is something that I'm thinking a lot about, is the extent to which, emerging technologies like AI can be a tool for empowerment, right? It kind of unlocks certain barriers for people. Challenge, of course, is that, there are already existing barriers in place, right? Like, how are we training on our models and on what data, right? Like, again, if that data is coming primarily from, non-African countries, well, then how applicable are the applications that we're going to be building, right, to those contexts? So I think that that's definitely an issue. But I also think what's interesting that she talked about, to kind of pull it up a little bit as well, is to really think about it at sort of the nation state level. Like she's operating both at the local level, which I think is what's exciting about her background. She's got about the ground level reality, but she's also operating at the sort of like, let's look at this across the nations in Africa and really think about what's happening at the policy level. And so one thing that she talked about a lot is that there's a lot of excitement and a lot of interest, but there's also a lot of disagreement amongst these countries around like how AI needs to be adopted, who needs to be involved, what kinds of regulations, and those conversations she said are still very early. Um, And so when you think about the pace of change of AI, like if they're at an early stage with those conversations and you have the EU that's like flying with like all of their regulatory sort of policies and trying to influence the world, and then you have like North America that's also trying to like be at the cutting edge of that. I just think that, what we don't want is the global south left behind on these issues, right? And the answer is not necessarily then just apply what North America, Europe are doing. That's not the answer either, right? The answer is how do we build AI policy and governance and regulation that's going to make sense for those contexts. Um, but that is something that the pace of the pace of development in the AI might just like outrun all of these other issues, and they're gonna. That's what's happening right now, right? So I don't know. I feel like it's a very complicated terrain that is, yes, about application, yes, about the models, and then about these larger governance issues.
No, absolutely. The good thing is that it seems that the conversations are happening, that people are grappling with these
Yeah,
challenges, and
exactly.
so for that, I'm absolutely optimistic. I feel that the innovation, the resilience, and all of those things, the determination, are things that we've always seen coming from the continent. So I am optimistic about the ability to navigate those challenges and really take advantage of the opportunity that it presents.
Yep. Yeah. Plus one to what Shadan said, like, you know, if you really think about it, the innovations out of here, like in AI, like a very US centric approach might not apply everywhere. But I feel like anything that comes out of, you know, a diverse country like Africa might actually be applicable everywhere. For example, Lavina gave us an example of the AI startup in agriculture.
Mhm.
So that might be something that's applicable to more of the world than rather than an example that comes from the US where there is no issue with water, no issue with access to pesticides or whatever you need for farming, right? So I'm thinking from that perspective, given the uh, right access to opportunity, like we might be seeing more coming out of uh, co- uh, continents like Africa rather than the North American side of the globe.
Yeah, plus one to what both of you are saying, and I just add something that, now that you're seeing more open source models, we know Meta just released an open source model, so I think that that's gonna give again, I mean, those models are trained on the data that they're trained on, right? And, like, it'll be interesting to see what people in other parts of the world are gonna do with that, like, how are they gonna make that useful for them? And are there ways of like once you start to add in other kinds of data, like does that actually evolve things in a different direction over time? Again, it's going to take time. So I don't know. I mean, I'm also very optimistic. I think again, it's a complicated terrain, but I think what one thing that I walked away from her was her energy of excitement. She seems super excited and
Mhm.
activated, and I think that she was so completely moved by the ways in which AI is being applied at the local ground level, Like
Mhm.
seeing somebody's life transformed as a result of, using technology to help unlock certain things. I think that that's the exciting potential that, yeah, I'm with both of you on that for sure. Um it's a messy world, but it's a messy, interesting, exciting, hopefully a world with a lot of opportunity in front of us.
Hands down.
Yeah. So we're going to close out and we'll see you all next time.
Absolutely. Take care.